Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla, and today we have a very special guest, Pramod Raheja. Pramod is the CEO and co-founder of Airgility. Welcome to the show, Pramod.
Thank you, Oda. Nice to meet you today, and happy to be here. And I didn't tell you that my nickname is Mode, so feel free to call me Mode if you like.
Okay, is that your preference? I'll be more than happy to call you Mode.
Either way, a lot of people call it to me. I've had it since high school, so I'm quite used to it.
That's great. Actually, before we go into your background and how you grew up, if you can just give the audience a general overview of what is Airgility.
Yeah, sure. So Airgility is a company that I co-founded 4 years ago that we do artificial intelligence and autonomy for unmanned robotic systems. So what does that mean in layman's terms? We build robots, and we actually put brains in robots, more importantly, in terms of how they think and how they get around the world and do what they do.
Oh my God, that's awesome. I just immediately went to, I don't know why, to Iron Man.
Yeah, that's there's all kinds of great, if you, and some of the audience members here might be too young, but it makes me think of the Jetsons, if you know that show.
Yes, I remember that show. That was a good show.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So you mentioned high school. Are you from around the area here, the DMV, or where were you born, or where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I do consider myself a local. I was a little bit the early days moving around. I was born in Boston, moved to India, then to Wisconsin, and then about age 12 to the DMV. And I've been in the DMV pretty much ever since, just a couple little sojourns here and there for jobs as a young adult. But for the most part, since age 12, the DMV. So yeah, absolutely, the DMV's home. Grew up in Maryland and now make my home in Virginia.
Oh, that's great. So prior to moving to the DMV before you were 12, I guess, what was the longest period of time? I know you mentioned Boston, then India. Where did you stay the longest bbefore moving here?
Yeah, that was Wisconsin. So, from about age, I want to say 4 through 12, Waukesha, Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee. So I'm a big Packers fan, and pretty much everything Wisconsin. Cheese also, and Oshkosh Air Show. So all Wisconsin stuff. So even now, many years later, I'm still quite have that affinity for Wisconsin.
I was a big fan of the Packers, especially when they had Brett Favre. When they had him, it was just amazing to see him in action.
Absolutely. He played lights out every game, so that's what made him really special.
Yes. So how were you growing up as far as what interests? What were you into?
Yeah, so quite varied interests. I think when we talk about entrepreneurship journeys, I look back and I see just many things that shape the way I think, the way I do things. And I think that probably applies for everybody and everybody's story, right? So for me, I had a lot of interest. I was very much into sports, but if we kind of relate to Airgility, I had probably at age 4 on, that's maybe as young as I can remember, 4 or 5, somewhere in there, airplanes and spaceships all over my walls. In my room. I think other people might have had pictures of Farrah Fawcett or Kathy Ireland or whoever was the model at the time, but I had pictures of astronauts, and so I was really smitten and passionate about aviation and aerospace. So I knew at age probably 3rd grade, whatever age that is, I guess 9 or something, that I knew I was going to be studying engineering in college. Like somehow I knew that at that age. I still remember doing a report and presenting it to my class on what an engineer does, because my dad was an engineer. And so I was very interested in science. I used to get a science kit of the month in the mail every month. These things I don't think exist anymore. And they would come in a little box. And every month it was something different. One month it might be chemistry, another month it might be magnetism, another month it might be solar, stuff to do with the sun and how the sun, how you collect energy. And I just would have a lot of fun with these kits. So going back many years, I had a very strong interest in math. Well, I don't want to say math, more science than math, but a lot of interest in science for sure. And I think I got by in math, but yeah, so that I would say that. And then, growing up and getting to high school, went to a science and technology magnet school in Greenbelt, Maryland, called Eleanor Roosevelt. So I grew up in Laurel, but I bussed over there. It was a 45-minute bus ride, but looking back on it, absolutely well worth it, just to go to that type of school and have a focus on science and engineering and math and STEM type stuff. And so yeah, and I was a big avid sports guy too. So I kind of straddle. I'm the kind of guy that'll wake up in the morning and work out or play a sport, and then work all day. And this goes back to school. I played sports all through high school, so it was a very busy time. But I wouldn't change a thing. It was so much fun.
That's great. What's I'm curious is, you said at around 4 you had already that interest. Do you think it had anything to do with, maybe, I know you mentioned your father was an engineer, where did he expose you to anything, or did you see anything that sort of piqued that interest at a very young age?
Well, I don't know that this did, but there's one moment, we have a picture of it where it's July 20th, 1969. I'm all of 4 months old at the time. And my mom is sitting on the couch with me in her lap, and there's a picture of her and the TV, and it's the moon landing. It's the lunar landing.
Oh.
And of course, I don't remember that. Of course not. But I feel like that was a seminal moment for me, because I grew up in that, as a little kid, not remembering any of that, was the Apollo program. Right. Yeah. So if we fast forward into past the Apollo program into where I'm now, in my teens, and the space shuttle program is going on, and so at that time, the space shuttle program was huge. Right. So I think those types of things that were in the news with NASA and all that growing up really, piqued my interest and made me really interested. I used to also watch anything I could get my hands on in terms of, we didn't have the internet back then, right? There was no internet, there was nothing. And so everything was just sort of TV. There was no TV on demand. I talk to young people these days, and I was like, back when I didn't have a cell phone, and they're like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Like they just can't even imagine and even me, I can't even imagine sometimes not having a cell phone. I'm like, how did I actually meet with people at a certain time at a certain place way back when? We didn't text each other. We didn't call each other. We just sort of said, I'll meet you at 5 o'clock at such and such a place. Right. So I know I got off topic there a little bit, but yeah, I just think those things that were in the news at that time, and the TV shows sometimes that were on. There was this TV show that called, and this is where I was going with this, In Search Of. It was and they would have like In Search of UFOs or In Search of Bigfoot, and I used to love that.
I remember those
kind of shows. And so anything to do with technology and science was just something I was always interested in. I would go to, in summers I would attend camps. In addition to sports camps, I would attend like astrophotography camp. I mean, what kid attended astrophotography camp, at age 11 or 12? I did. And so those are the kind of things I was interested in.
Wow, that's so interesting to hear. It just brings back memory. I was just having a conversation with my oldest son and talking about phones. And I was telling him, I was like, there was once upon a time phones on the wall, and it would be rotary. You would have to go around circles. He was like, what, Dad, really? Yes, it was pre-internet, all that, cell phone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned you went to a magnet program. Was it a magnet school in Greenbelt, Maryland?
Yeah, it was. And, prior to that, even after those science kits, I think I got my first computer. Again, I don't remember the exact age, but it's probably 5th or 6th grade. And it was, some sort of PC ripoff, Packard Bell, I think. And then we eventually got an Apple II Plus, I think it was. And I started programming. And started programming a language that probably nobody knows these days called BASIC. And I was making games with my friends. And I was, again, sort of, even though I was really into sports and stuff, I would geek out a little bit on Dungeons and Dragons and those sort of things. It wasn't until I got to high school that I discovered girls, and then, some of those things kind of went away. Mm-hmm. but yeah. And so those kind of things that I did on my own is really what I'm getting at, is like the programming and stuff. Those were just things I did on my own. It wasn't like I went to school for those things. Then yes, that kind of parlayed into this sort of magnet school type of, application and desire to go there. And so, yes, that was in Greenbelt, Maryland. They would bring in kids from all over Prince George's County into the magnet program at Eleanor Roosevelt.
Sure. So you must have loved it when it came down to science fair every year.
Yeah, and I guess I was never the top of the class kind of kid. Yes, there were science fairs and things like that, but being super active with sports as well. There were some of those extracurriculars I didn't participate in as much as other kids did that were really, truly, I'll call the science geeks and some of the brains of my class.
Sure, sure. So after Roosevelt, where'd you end up going for college?
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew, again, as going back to third grade, I knew I was going to be studying engineering, and so it was really no brainer that I was going to go to an engineering school of some sort. I was a runner at the time, a long distance runner. I was very competitive, and I was recruited for long distance running in college. And I had some very specific criteria. I wanted to go to a big engineering school. That was my criteria. Unfortunately, some of the big engineering schools are also some of the top running programs in the country. University of Michigan and University of Wisconsin, places like that, which is where I wanted to go. So I got into these schools, but not based on my athletics. It was purely based on academics, because I wasn't being recruited by them. I was being recruited by smaller schools and smaller D1 schools, that kind of thing. So if I wanted to run at one of these schools, it was going to be really as a walk-on initially, right? And then I'd hope for maybe a partial scholarship or something down the road. Well, I had ended up making a decision between the University of Michigan and the University of Maryland, and both of them had top-notch aerospace engineering programs, which is what I wanted to study. And both top 10 schools in that major. And growing up in Maryland, of course, Maryland was in state. And I was very familiar with Maryland. I had been going and doing training and workouts there for, even in high school. I had taken engineering classes already while in high school. So I decided to do an early admission into Maryland, and that's what I ended up doing. And I'm really happy I did. I'm a proud TERP lifetime alumni member, and now as they call it on campus, an entrepreneur.
I love that. A fellow Terp. Go Terps.
Yeah.
So you went to Maryland, and then you ended up graduating with engineering degree, right?
Absolutely. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then after that, Mo, what happened?
Yeah. So, in college, I had some great opportunities and internships and jobs and things like that. And one of them was at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, which is in Greenbelt, right down the road from University of Maryland. And I remember one day sitting at my cubicle, nobody was there. It was late in the evening, and I was programming in Fortran, and I was working on a satellite program of some sort. I can't remember. And I thought, wow, this is so cool that I'm working on a satellite program for NASA. Oh my God, this is amazing. But I was also realized that I really like to talk to people. I like to get in front of people, and I didn't see myself as an engineer sitting behind a desk programming my entire career. And so I think that was also a seminal moment, which I didn't know at that time, but looking back on it, that moment when, having that thought, which I still remember very vividly in my mind, being there alone with the fluorescent lights of, the office and nobody else was there, was that, I really wanted to get into the business side of technology, right? I saw myself more as a technology executive, not necessarily an engineer. And so that in that junior senior year of college is when I kind of decided, hey, if I do something in engineering or technology, I kind of want to go down more of a leadership path, on the maybe biz dev, sales, marketing side of things. I didn't know that at that time. Nobody talked about that sort of thing at that time. But anyways, so after college, while I was in college, I really wanted to be a pilot. And so I had toyed with military for even in high school. I had looked at the Naval Academy and places like that were of great interest to me, and decided that I wanted to go to a regular school, and that if I really was interested in the military, I would revisit it during college, which I did. So then, by junior year, I was very focused on getting into a program called Aviation Officer Candidate School in the Navy. And I did. I got in, and they gave me a pilot slot. So I was excited to go to go become an officer and go to flight school. Unfortunately, this was in the early 90s, and there was a huge military drawdown, like Mongo, probably the biggest in the history of, maybe post World War II in the history of our country. And so my slot that I was awarded actually got cut, and it was nothing to do with me. It was a pure numbers game. And I've now since met many others that have had that same fate, or they joined, they got carrier qualified, meaning they were able to fly off aircraft carriers, and then they were asked to leave. They were like, hey, we don't need you as a pilot anymore, so we can have you do another job role, or you can, be honorably discharged, right? And so I've met now a number of people. So, misery loves company. So once you see that, hey, you're not the only one, there's other people out there, you start to feel like, okay, it is what it is. But for a little while, I was pretty bummed about that. But I didn't let it slow me down. I still wanted to be a pilot. So I ended up kind of continuing my flight training. I didn't mention that I actually started flight training while in college, just on the side separately. I lived by a little strip called Suburban Airfield in Laurel, Maryland. And in the summers, I would ride my bike 2 miles to the airstrip and take flying lessons. And I did that, even during the semester, but in a much less focused fashion, because I was very busy with school. But in the summer, I got pretty focused. And so I already had done some primary flight training. So I continued that flight training after college, and became an airline pilot. So.
Oh, that's great. Okay. And you did that for a while, right?
Yeah. In fact, I did it for many years. Then I took a leave of absence back in the early 2000s when I had started and I was running another company. And then I actually went back in 2011, 12. And in addition to, the companies that I was running at that time, so I'm serial entrepreneur just to a large extent, I continued to fly. And so I still actually continue to fly. I still fly a little bit every month. So you might see me on a flight in the cockpit. Generally I'll fly on a weekend, or you might see me in an evening, because I sort of schedule I'm senior enough to make my schedule such a way that it fits my entrepreneurial lifestyle. Let's just say that. And it is a juggling act. It's not easy, but I've learned how to make it work. And it's really kind of I'm sort of an anomaly, and I know that, and I love it, because I absolutely love everything I do, both sides of, sort of having two careers essentially.
Sure. And I'm sure the flying is because you want to continue, you have a passion for it. That's why you continue to do it on a part-time basis, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love it still. And I look at my career, and I've been flying altogether. I've been flying for 34 years.
Wow.
And as an airline pilot, 27, 28 almost. And I look back, and if you still love something, that says something about it, right? I still absolutely love it. And so, as I look into the future and see that I have still quite a few more years to go, I still also know how time flies, and that, I'm going to savor, every moment of my professional career going forward, where, no matter what I'm doing. So.
Sure. I'm sure in your 20s, becoming a pilot, it's something, my God, I'm traveling the world and it's all this great experience. And I'm sure that's different now once you have a family, right?
Yeah, sure. So, I think, it is tough on a family when you're coming and going all the time, right? And I met my wife while I was in college. And so after college, when we started to date and, get more serious, she already kind of knew this was going to be my lifestyle and what I was going to do. So I think that we knew what we were getting into, at that time. And so we've made it work. I got to give her like most of or not all the credit, because she puts up with a lot, of course, of me coming and going all the time and having these like crazy schedules as an entrepreneur and as a pilot. And so it is a juggling act. And even as the kids were growing up, she was absolutely the anchor at home, with me traveling and things like that. We've now been married 26 years, or it will be 26 years this month, at the end of this month. And we got through the kids are in college now, and so we're empty nesters, and they've turned out, pretty good. So no, we got through it all. But if I look back, there was definitely lots of ups and downs and twists and turns, and overall very positive, fun journey overall. But definitely good times, hard times, all that stuff that goes into our lives, for sure.
Sure. Mo, I'm curious, with the flying you do now, do you try to stay local in the country, or do you do international, or can you actually even just choose what you want to do?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of airplane you fly. So I have intentionally chosen to stay domestic right now, other than Canada and Mexico, which is still kind of domestic. And so, yeah, and that is by design. That is so that I can remain, focused on Airgility and focused on, not being all over the world in crazy time zones, just fatigued all the time, right? And so I have flown globally, I have flown internationally. At the moment, I choose to really stay, what I'll say, grounded in the domestic market, so that it's very easy for me to, no matter where I am, I'm able to be in touch and be able to run my business.
Sure, that's good. You mentioned earlier, you're a lifelong entrepreneur. You mentioned other businesses you had. Were they at all related or in the same industry that Airgility, or different?
No, absolutely not. In fact, they were totally opposite. So if I go back many years now, my first, what I'll call real business, I've always been doing something. I've always been selling something on the side. I was selling T-shirts in college. So going back, I'll just give you the whole scoop there. Going back to even when I became an airline pilot, I started a side hustle right away, and I was selling back again, going back to the no cell phone thing. As a pilot, just like a doctor, depending on your seniority and depending on your position and all that, you might be on call where you have a page, we would have a pager. And when the page came in, you had to call back, and say, hey, yeah, what's going on? Yeah, we need you to be at, the airport at, 7 PM or whatever. And no different than a doctor on call that, needs to answer, talk to a patient or get to the hospital. Right. And so back then I would sell pagers to other pilots, and I would also sell 800 number service. 800 number service was actually a big thing back then, because if you wanted to make any kind of call, it was long distance. We didn't just pick up our cell phone and just, it was cheap. It was actually very expensive. So what people would do is I would sell them an 800 number, which they would attach to their home line, and then they would call that 800 number, and it was a lot cheaper doing it that way. And so I did that for a while. And I was also, I've had the good fortune of being, in various roles at the airlines where I was teaching and an instructor. So one of the things I used to teach is something called crew resource management, which is essentially leadership for pilots and flight crews. And it's really focused on leadership in high reliability, high risk environments where if you make mistakes, bad things can happen, right? Medicine is another one. So I actually took that training and that teaching that I did at the airlines, and I started a consulting company taking that to healthcare. And I did that for a few years. It was great. It really made me realize how much I loved business and sales, because I was selling into the C-suite. I was also qualified to deliver the training. So I was kind of playing this operational role and also this sort of, leadership executive role, and which was quite versatile. And then I thought about going to business school, and I talked to my wife. This was a long time ago now. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about going to a good business school. I take a leave of absence from flying. And she was, again, to credit to her, very much like, hey, we'll make it work if that's something you really want to do. And I'll work while you do that, and et cetera, et cetera. And we kind of talked about it, but I just can't sit still. I didn't see myself, going to school just for 2 years, for 2 or 3 years potentially, or whatever it is. And depending on if you choose full-time, part-time, whatever. And I needed to, so I was actually ready to start another business. And so I started another company where I bought a franchise called the Intelligent Office. And I grew that to 4 locations in the DMV, actually, one in Reston, Alexandria, Tyson's Corner, and Arlington. From about 2004 through 2011, I was in a very operational role, running those locations. I was the CEO, managing partner. And then 2011-ish, stepped out of the day-to-day role. And in 2017, eventually kind of sold out of all of it. I stayed on as a board member and all that sort of thing, but and an owner, but sold all out of that. So that was really all about B2B services. That wasn't anything to do with aerospace or deep tech or anything like that, right? And in 2012, started another company called mystaffnow.com, which was really all around online virtual staffing, which now is a much bigger thing. There's just tons of websites where you can find talent for your business, and even it's still a jungle out there. So, a lot has changed and a lot hasn't changed in that world. But when this opportunity came along in 2017, to start something, and it was definitely not a sure thing. It was really like we had started with nothing. This Airgility is really a good story of really, starting with nothing and creating something out of it, right? And when I say nothing, I don't mean that there wasn't knowledge, there wasn't vision, there wasn't, some building and some prototyping going on, just that we didn't have anything to do with the business. We didn't have a business model. We didn't know what we were selling even yet. So when you think about a business, you kind of walk out starting a business thing. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go sell t-shirts or whatever, right? We didn't know that yet. So, and I think that's a lot of technology businesses that are very, very in the early days of a new industry, right? You're sort of almost defining what that industry is going to look like, and you don't know what it's going to look like yet. So for me, it may sound really weird, but it was a dream come true, because I really wanted to get back into aerospace, and I wanted to start something that was revolutionary, that was new, that was going to impact the world, in a big way. And my wife likes to tell me that, she goes, "You're always manifesting." And I when she first would tell me that, I didn't know exactly what she meant. But what she really means is, like, I'll think about something, and then I'll, almost subconsciously, you just start taking action going in that direction because it's something you want, right? Mm-hmm. And she says I do that all the time in a lot of different areas, and she's like, I want to learn how to do that, and so I consider that a compliment, of course. But yeah, so nobody really knew that at the time, that I was really interested in doing something in aerospace. And aerospace has been my first love and passion, as we've talked about, since the beginning of the show, since I was 4. And when I graduated in the early 90s, as I mentioned, I became a pilot, but nothing was really happening in the aerospace world. It was dead, no jobs, it was a recession. So I grew up in this Apollo and shuttle era. And then in early 90s, there was nothing going on. Fast forward to now, and even the last, we'll say 6, 7, 8 years, there is an absolute aerospace revolution in any kind of thing you can think of: manned flight, unmanned flight, space, satellites, the whole space economy. We're watching in the news these days with Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot more. You see that in the news, but there's a lot more around that. And so no matter, I think going forward, that's really where I want to stay, is in the sort of future tech of aerospace.
Sure. So obviously your love of aerospace, and you were trying to see what you can do. So how did Airgility come about as far as?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great story too. So I was sitting around on a Sunday afternoon about to watch a Packers game, and it was getting cozy on my couch with my blanket, and I get a text from an old business coach of mine. His name is Glenn Hellman, and Glenn says in his text, "Hey, I'm mentoring and I'm advising this person. This person happens to be my co-founder, which now, but at that time wasn't. His name is Evandro Valente, and he was faculty at Maryland, and he had some IP and some prototyping that he had been working on. He had ideas for years that he wanted to do something, and he was starting to take action on it. And so in a university setting, if you're a faculty and you have an invention, you typically disclose that to university, because technically they own it, and they don't have to take it on, but if they like the idea, they will. And then they go ahead and help that faculty with their patents and things like that. And then now they are an inventor, and they're an owner of that, they're a joint owner of that patent. But if they want to start a business, then that's a whole different effort, right? So sure. Evandro wanted to start a business. And so Glenn, who was the entrepreneur in residence at the time, I'm not sure if you ever heard of that term, but most research universities have somebody that's an entrepreneur in residence to help students and faculty commercialize their inventions. So that was his role. So he would get assigned somebody, and then he would, work with them for a period of time, working with them on putting together a business plan and introducing them to the right people. And so in my case, Glenn said to Evandro, "Hey, you're going to need a good co-founder CEO if you're going to do this, if you're really serious about this." And so, to Evandro's credit, not all faculty are open to that. He was, and he said, "Look, yeah, sure, introduce me to some people." And so I was one of the individuals that got introduced. And I think both of us are super, super passionate about aerospace, and we kind of hit it off right away. Just on that note alone was like, wow, okay, we both are, from that perspective, really get along, because we're like, wow, we're really passionate people about these kind of things, about flying and aviation and what's possible. So we got introduced, spent a few months, so it was an arranged marriage or an arranged dating. We dated for a few months, and then we started the company in mid 2017. So just a little bit, just about 4 years, a little over 4 years ago. And again, like I said, we didn't know what we were doing. He had started working on a prototype, but nothing was flying or working at the time. So we didn't know what the future held. And, the industry was still very young. And here's a little lesson maybe for the listeners or viewers. I thought I was late to the party in the industry of unmanned systems, unmanned robotic systems at that time. I'm like, we got to move fast and I can't wait to get going. And fast forward to now, 2021, we're actually at the right place at the right time right now, and what we're doing. It took a while for us to do a lot of what we have done. R&D and deep tech takes a long time, especially when you're working with hardware and software. And now, as we've talked about, I'm in Las Vegas for a conference, and some of the things that are like on the cutting edge is exactly what we're doing. So it's pretty exciting to see that. And it's also kind of like, hey, it's good we never gave up. We just hung in there, and regardless of where we thought the timing was, we were actually wrong about it. We thought we were late to the party and we weren't.
There you go. It takes time. I'm curious, when you received that text that Sunday, were you in something else, or when you decided to do Airgility, did you give it 100%? I know you've always been in different businesses.
Yeah, that's a good question. And many of us entrepreneurs tend to maybe take too much on at given times. I know I certainly have, and I've learned lessons from that. I'd say at that time I was running my staff now. It was a small growing, I call it a lifestyle business. It was a good business. It was growing. And so for the first year, I kind of still had it in parallel, but then I realized I needed to go all in to Airgility. And I eventually merged that in with somebody else, just kind of quietly sort of said, hey, you want to take on my business? And we worked out an arrangement that made sense, so essentially sold it, but it wasn't like a big exit or anything like that. It was a fair sort of, okay, this is the right way to do it. And let's go ahead and just move on, and so that business certainly had a lot of legs and could have grown. And I had to make a decision though. I had to sort of, say, okay, I could do this, which is kind of a sure thing, and it's going to be, a good lifestyle and good cash flow and long-term and all that. Or I could take a big risk here and potentially nothing could happen. Potentially we could never make a dime. Potentially we could close the doors before we even get started. And I chose that route. And I chose that route because this really was I thought a big opportunity working with the right co-founder to do something special.
Sure, that's great. When you started Airgility in 2017, the market always shifts and changes. Is it the same business plan 3-4 years ago, or has it shifted and changed with time?
That's a great question. You ask good questions. So no, absolutely not. We have changed quite a bit from day one. And I'd say anybody, again, that's sort of part of defining a new industry, a new thing is going to find that they have to stay focused. Focus is absolutely paramount. But at the same time, you have to be flexible and know that, hey, I have to shift around a little bit. And I'll give you our story. We started out with a larger, we talk about drones. We started out with this vehicle that was kind of a large 5 by 6 foot, delivery and logistics vehicle. So we planned, hey, medical delivery, supplies delivery to the battlefield or between hospitals or whatever, or people like to joke, delivering pizzas, right. And certainly that drone could carry a couple large pies, for sure, maybe even 3 of them inside. And so, that was sort of the focus at the time, not necessarily the pizza, but the delivery and of some sort. And we were fortunate in that we went out of the gate, we really kind of strategically took a look at our business and said, okay, if we try to go get funding right now, we're gonna have to give away a lot of the company because we don't really have a whole lot. So if somebody's gonna take the leap and invest in us, they're gonna want a lot, right, to do that risk. So we decided to initially just purely go after non-dilutive capital. And we could do that. We weren't taking salaries, et cetera. So there wasn't a whole lot of payroll. We had free space on the university campus. And so costs were very minimal at the time. Really, the only costs were just whatever we needed to do what we were doing, which was build prototypes. And at that time. And so we initially got our launch, with some non-dilutive money. I will say that the DMV in general has a lot of great resources for entrepreneurs. Specifically being tied to the University of Maryland, there were a number of programs that allowed us to go and apply for these things. One of them called the Maryland Industrial Partnership Program. And so we actually applied for some funding. We found a faculty advisor, which was a requirement for that program. And we got our first R&D money. Now, unfortunately, this money was not to be used for salaries or operations, it was purely for R&D. But that's okay, because we needed to do that R&D anyway. So it was kind of funding the R&D essentially, right? And so we did that. And then about 6 months into starting the company, I found out about, maybe not even that, 5, 6 months, found out about a program that the Virginia Center for Innovation and Technology was running with DHS. And it was a smart cities program. Smart cities implying, hey, how do we use technology to improve our towns and cities, right? And UAVs or drones being just one component of that. There's many components, there's communications and things like that. And so this whole program was centered around public safety. How do we use technology, public safety, to improve, whether we're, in disaster situation, like we've seen over the last year, quite a few disaster situations, or even just, be proactive in day-to-day life, right? And so we were fortunate to be one of only 2 companies, UAV companies out of maybe a couple hundred that applied for this, to be picked for this program. And what they wanted us to do is they said, hey, we want you to build a vehicle that can fly autonomously. When I say autonomously, I mean essentially by itself for the most part, where you have a human on the loop versus in the loop, and you're just pressing buttons and telling it what to do. And we want you to be able to do it in a GPS denied environment, meaning, hey, you need to be able to fly anywhere. Typically a drone will fly when they're looking at GPS coordinates, and you need to have at least 4 satellites to get those coordinates, right? Mm-hmm. And here, if you're flying indoors, you don't have any coordinates. So you have to be able to figure out my situational awareness around me as a drone, wherever I am. And so this was a tall order, and it's not something we'd planned to do. And we kind of looked at it, and we started with our airframe and made some adjustments to the airframe to be able to do this. And then we started really focusing on the AI and the autonomy. And we first started thinking, hey, we need to partner with a company for this, because we don't know this stuff. But again, resources in the DMV are abundant. And we were able to find really good, initially, interns from the University of Maryland that focused on robotics and artificial intelligence. They were hungry for job experience, and we were hungry for talent. And now some of those first interns are our full-time, engineers and robotics AI team. And so we've actually got a very robust operation around that, and that's a big focus. And we are leading that, and we're going to be known as leaders in that, as well. So we did pivot around, to answer your question, quite a bit to get to this point. We're still going to go back to the, outside delivery and logistics. And if I look back on the whole thing, part of it was, and some of your listeners and viewers may have heard of the blue ocean strategy. So back then, when I told you about this DHS thing that CIT put together, which by the way was, a great program from Virginia, and it's still a good program. They have a number of programs, in fact. We actually employed that blue ocean strategy. And blue ocean strategy just implies, hey, do I want to go where the red ocean is, where everybody is, all my competitors, and everybody's throwing tons of money at it, Google and Amazon, and everybody's trying to do this. Not to mention that, there's a lot of hurdles there. There's regulatory hurdles, there's still technical risk. That could take millions, and we might flame out way before that ever happens. Or do we go to this and solve this problem of, GPS denied autonomous flight in any condition, which is really hard to do. We could fail at this, but if we succeed, we'll be just one of a few top players that can do this. And that's where we are now.
I love that. You just mentioned earlier, Mode, about interns, starting off as interns, and now they're full-time team members. I'm curious, how does your team look today now, and how do you go about finding the right people to place at the right seat in the bus?
Yeah, that great question. So I like to say we establish fishing holes in various locations, right? You have to establish really good fishing holes where the fish are biting. And so universities, of course, are great. So we have strong ties to University of Maryland, being a spin out, being alumni. We reside, our company resides, our main operation in the Discovery District of College Park, which is really where innovation is thriving, and there's a lot of companies there, and we're one of the fortunate companies to be there. And so Maryland, of course, and I have 2 boys at Virginia Tech. And so I'm pretty tied into Virginia Tech now too. And so we have some good ties, and we've had some interns now. We've started an intern flow from Virginia Tech, from their engineering and comp sci departments. And then we also work with other universities. We have a couple in Boston that we work with, that we have co-op co-op agreements with. So, I feel like you really need to, if you're going to have a long-term viable company that you want to, build beyond yourself and succeed, you've got to create those fishing holes and that talent flow. And now I'm happy to say we have, we can't keep up with our the number of people that want to come work with us, nor can we afford to hire them all right now. So it's a good problem to have. And then I think the second question, there was a two-part question there, was the right seat on the bus. Part of that obviously is, looking for the right skill set, but more importantly than the skill set is absolutely important. I don't want to belittle that, but more importantly is, are they the right team member for our culture? Right. And so we live by certain core values, and when we interview, we keep those in our minds, and we actually talk about them in the interview and kind of gauge for that. Right. And so those are the kind of things we do. And then when we bring in people for interviews, they're not just interviewing me or my co-founder. I mean, they're interviewing with other members of the team, and we get a pretty good feel for how that team member will potentially operate and collaborate with their team members, but also, their skill set. Do they have the right skill set to do the job? Being a small company, we don't have, being and very, very fast paced, I must add too. And this probably applies to a lot of startups. We don't have the time to really handhold. We kind of throw people into the fire. I don't want to say that we have bad training or anything, because we certainly have training. We certainly do, care and want to help, walk people, but they kind of have to show up self-accountable, right?
Sure.
They're going to be given something and they may not know the answer, and they may have to push the boundaries. They may have to figure it out on their own. They may have to go ask for help on their own, as opposed to us coming to them and saying, do you need help? We're looking for them to say, hey, I'm working on this. I have this problem. I'm stuck here, and then we'll figure it out, but we're looking for those the self-accountable type of people that are self-starters.
Sure. Are most of the people coming in, are they fresh out of college or with some experience already in the industry?
Yeah, both. Early on, right now, as the company is still young, a lot of people admittedly are younger, and we like to hire a lot of our interns because they get to know us, we get to know them, and we see their potential, and we want to grow them from within. So we do hire a lot of young talent, but now as the company is starting to mature and we're starting to move forward in a bigger way, that is changing to where it's more of a mix, and we're looking for people with much more industry experience in certain areas, of course, and so it's becoming a mix, and that's where protecting the culture becomes very important. So we actually intentionally meet with our team, and we talk about culture, and we talk about as new people come on board, protecting that culture and making sure that we're hiring the right people, and even when they're here, that we're all on the same page with respect to that.
Sure. You just mentioned earlier having an office in College Park, and I understand you also have an office in Northern Virginia as well, right?
Yes.
And as you know, I'm in commercial real estate, so I'm curious, how do you go about selecting that right location for you and your team to live in?
Yeah, so College Park was kind of a default, right? We started the company out of College Park. We haven't gone anywhere. We're not planning on going anywhere. We do plan on expanding. However, our plan is to maintain the R&D focus in College Park, no matter where the expansion is. So into 2022 and 2023, there'll be a big focus on manufacturing expansion. We don't exactly know where that's going to be yet. It might be in Maryland. It might be in Virginia. We'd like to keep that supply chain as close to, when I say supply chain, supplies come from all over the world and all over the US, but that chain of building close to us if we can. And it's not to say that we won't, make something somewhere else in the country, but we're really focused on the DMV as much as we can. And so right now we have a small office in Reston, very small. It's more like a sales office kind of thing. We have meetings there and conference room use, that sort of thing. But going into 2023, we're looking at Tyson's Corner as more of a headquarters from a corporate standpoint. There's a lot of reasons for that. Tyson's is a very central point for the DMV. It's also robust with pretty much all the aerospace primes being there, and us desiring to be close to them as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what would you say you're most proud of thus far in your business career?
That's a good question. I think that I'd say That's I don't know if I can answer that with one answer. There's probably two or three facets to that. But I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. The first being pretty proud of what we've done with Airgility. Started a brand from scratch that I think is, even though it's still early and small, it's a pretty good brand in terms of, and I say that just based on some examples. We were at a large show a couple weeks ago called AUVSI, which is the largest unmanned robotics conference in the world. Normally it's huge. I mean, it was still big, but normally it's like ginormous and people come from all corners of the world. But with COVID, it was a little smaller than normal. But for us, it was still big. And there was a guy there, really smart guy that we actually kind of knew. We didn't know him. He didn't know us. We just knew of him. And he's a professor at another university, and he saw me and my co-founder with our Airgility t-shirts on, and he said, "Oh, Airgility!" He goes, "I've been following you guys. I love what you're doing." And we just had this great conversation, and now we would love to hire this guy because he's really smart. And so I'm really proud of what we've built. It's been a really tough road to do, even to get to where we are, and the future looks bright. But nevertheless, being an entrepreneur and being in a sort of industry like this early stage, there's still lots of problems and day-to-day issues that pop up, and cash flow and this and that. Because even if you're doing well and you're trying to grow, cash flow can become an issue because you've got to feed the beast, right? You've got to hire, you've got to launch, and so it can be very challenging. But I'm very proud. The trend has been like this. But and most entrepreneurs will get this, but it's like that on that trend, and or like this, and this roller coaster truly is. But I'm very proud of where we are and what we've gotten to. And then the flip side of that coin is also on the personal side, just my family, being really supportive, and big fans of what we're doing, and even supporting my goals, and supporting the bigger vision, just being successful and being able to have all that and not fall off the rails, right? Because it can be stressful, and so you can fall off the rails, and we all have our moments where we don't believe, and we're like, are we going to be able to do this? And I still have those every single day, but then I quickly bounce and realize what we have on our hands and go, wow, we just have the world in our hands here. Let's make this happen. Let's go. So.
With your robust entrepreneurial and business experience, what advice would you give someone who came to you and say, "Hey, I want to start up a new business"? Well, what are a few pointers or suggestions?
Yeah, good question. I would say, this may or may not apply in all situations, but this one does. This one applies in all situations, and that is believe in yourself and be positive. You're going to doubt yourself. You're going to absolutely sometimes feel like an imposter, especially if you're going to an industry. There's many entrepreneurs that go into industries they know nothing about. I'm one of those. I've done that a few times now, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't be there. You absolutely can and should be there. So believe in yourself. So that applies to everybody. Now here's one that may not apply to everybody because it depends on exactly what you're doing, but it can apply to many. Sell first. Go out and gauge and figure out, hey, do I have something on my hands? And I did that with my staff now. Before I started my staff now many years ago, I actually went and sold what I was planning to sell before I even incorporated the company. And so, and I think I got $1,000, and I was like, oh, okay. I think I'm going to go start a company with this $1,000, and so I sold first. Right. And what I did was I tested the market, and granted, it was not a scientifically proven test. I didn't have thousands of data points, but it was enough for me to say anecdotally, I've got something here on my hands. So I would say that's a big one, is really gauge that, ahead of time. If you can, it may not apply if you're in a brand new industry, or if you're trying something totally new. But the more from a customer discovery standpoint of users, what do they want? Well, what do they really want? The better. So do as much of that homework as you can, but don't let it stifle you from starting, because that can happen too. The paralysis by analysis,
I love that. Sell first. I agree 100%. What would you say is your biggest challenge in your role today with Airgility?
Doing as much as we've done with very little. And that still continues to this day. We have, we're still a small company. We have limited resources, but we've been able to accomplish a lot. Even in fact, the technology that we've built and it's now going to market right now, we've probably done that with under $2 million, where some of our competitors have $300 million in funding, and we're still in certain ways doing better than, our technology is better than theirs. All right. And I won't go into the details of that on the show, but it, you asked me earlier, what am I proud? That's probably one of the most proudest things, is how scrappy we are. I've always considered myself a scrappy entrepreneur. I'm also a scrappy athlete on whatever sport I play. So it's kind of like that, kind of goes hand in hand. And I do look at entrepreneurs as athletes. We're athletes. You have to stay on top of the mental game. You have to take care of yourself, your diet, your sleep, all that. And just like an athlete does. So, and just like an athlete, I believe in coaching. I believe in having a coach. I believe in somebody there that doesn't have any vested interest in anything other than just helping you be at the top of your game.
I love that. That's great advice about getting a coach. A lot of people I know actually have business coaches, and they always tell me, obviously you have to pick the right one, but it's tremendous help. Absolutely.
And don't be afraid to change either. I've had several business coaches over the years, and for various reasons. I had one for a couple of years from Tony Robbins International, which is a great organization. But, after a couple of years, I was like, I think it's time for a change, and so that's normal too. And if you look at professional athletes that, especially individual athletes like tennis players and track runners and swimmers, they'll have an individual coach, and sometimes, that coach will be with them for years and years in their entire career. And other times they're switching every few years because it's just, that's what they need.
Yeah. I agree. Looking at your journey today, all the different businesses to Airgility where it is today, what do you know now that you wish you would have known at the start of your business career?
Yeah, I think, I would go back to the advice I gave earlier about the imposter syndrome. It's still even to this day, I still do. Even though I'm very well qualified and have all the pedigree for the CEO co-founder job I have, and in terms of my career progression and degree and all that, I still sometimes feel like, am I the right guy? And I feel out of place at times. But as soon as I realize that I'm not, I quickly bounce back and have all the confidence in the world. So I'd say, just kind of going back many, many, many years, I wish I had that confidence right at the beginning of something and didn't doubt myself. I would say that's probably the biggest piece of advice. There's many other tactical things I could share, right? Like sell first, or go get help for accounting. Don't do that all yourself, stuff like that, There's lots of tactical advice I can give that would help a first-time entrepreneur. But on a larger sort of high level, it's really just believe in yourself and realize that you can get help for the things you're not good at. Go focus on what you're good at. And I realized that early on, you may not have a budget. You may have to do a lot yourself and be the chief everything officer. But these days, with all the online talent out there and the ability to hire, part-time talent, you don't need to hire full-time and have somebody just for a few hours a week, is very possible. And you can get a lot off your plate. An example would be having an executive assistant. I have an executive assistant that's virtual and, best thing in the world, because they do all my scheduling. She's able to handle some of the bookkeeping and HR and things like that. And just takes, probably hours off my week and just keeps things moving, right? Where I may be, otherwise I become the bottleneck, right? And then I don't focus on the things I should focus on. And then other people are waiting on me and I look bad, right? So here you have an assistant and they're on top of it, and you look at your calendar and you go, oh wow, okay, cool. Everything's set. She took care of it, And so that's another piece of advice is, if early on, don't, get a virtual assistant, and you can get one not too inexpensive, and you don't need to get them full time. You can get them for a few hours a week.
That's true. Great advice. Thank you. What does the future hold? What's the vision the next 5 years looks like for you and Airgility?
Yeah. So I see Airgility really having an impact, improving and saving lives all over the world. We see our brains, we call it intelligence by Airgility. We see our software and our brains being put into many robots, probably mostly flying robots, but it can be ground robots as well, or maritime, but we'll go with flying for now. all around the world. And so we want to see intelligence by Airgility in the next 5 years in 100,000 vehicles worldwide. Is really our goal, is a big part of our goal. It's our BHAG. It's one of our BHAGs, we'll call it, our big, hairy, audacious goals.
I love that. Coming to an end here now, when you're not busy, obviously running the company, what do you like to do in your free time for fun?
Yeah, I love, just going back to childhood, I love sports. So I'm a runner, swimmer, biker, skier, tennis player. Obviously having a very busy lifestyle, in terms of 2 careers, I can't, I can't put the hours in of sports that I love to, because I used to play in soccer leagues and ice hockey leagues, and my schedule's too sporadic to be consistent with that. So now I fit in my workouts wherever I can. It could be morning, it could be night, it could be middle of the day. It doesn't matter. It's really where I can get it in. And so going back to being a runner, running is still my most favorite activity. It's like meditative for me. It's where I go out, de-stress and just, some people love to meditate. I do meditate, but I'd rather run. And that is sort of a meditation for me. And then from a sports perspective, as I get older, my goal here is to play more and more tennis. I love tennis. It's a sport you can play into your 80s or 90s and have a lot of fun and play with lots of people of different levels of play as well.
You mentioned you have 2 boys and they're both at Virginia Tech, right? I'm curious, this is more of a selfish question mode. I have 3 young boys, so I'm at the other side of the spectrum, but going off your experience now with all the different businesses, and I love as part the importance you give to marketing and sales and business development, did you incorporate anything in them when childhood growing them and rearing them to where they are today?
If I understand your question, the answer would be yes. I was always kind of like selling something. I was always organizing something, if I look back at my youth, in high school, of course, I was very busy with sports, but getting into college, I started to really hone in and join clubs and, in my profession, and I became officers and things like that. And so from the organizational aspect of things, I'd say those leadership skills, people call them soft skills, right? They're not really soft skills. It's, how you deal with people. I think those are very important life skills. And I hate the word soft because it makes it sound less important, right? And so, yeah. And then one of the things I did that give thanks to my dad for this is he put me through a course when I was a freshman in college in the freshman year, I'm going to the Dale Carnegie course, if you've ever heard of that.
Yes.
Dale Carnegie course for effective speaking and human relations. So it really honed my ability to communicate and speak in public. And I also became a facilitator in that program after that. And so here I am, all of 19 years old. I'm a facilitator in the Dale Carnegie course, which is almost a 12 or 13-week course. And everybody in that class was at least in their mid-30s. And here I am facilitating, whatever you want to call it, sales professionals. It was a class full of people from all walks of life, but many were sales professionals. And the interesting part is that I think I was really hesitant to give my age. So I think when we did our intros, I never did that. And nobody asked, which is really odd, until at the end of the year, one of the class members threw a Kentucky Derby party at our house on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. So we go out to the Eastern Shore and we're hanging out, and everybody's wearing their hats and stuff, the Kentucky Derby. And somebody offers me a mint julep drink. And I said, oh, no, I'm sorry, I can't. And they were like, why not? And I said, well, I'm underage. And they said, what are you talking about? We thought you were like a sales professional working somewhere. And I was like, no, I'm a freshman engineering major at Maryland. And they were like, what? And I'm glad that they didn't find that out till the end of the class, because they had a lot of respect for me. They appreciated what I did. I don't know if they might have had a bias if they found out I was a little student, punk early on. Sure. Nowhere near the life experience they had. So.
Did you use anything similar like that, raising your 2 boys, as far as exposing them to things like that?
Absolutely. So they have the Dale Carnegie books. They all sit on my bookshelf, and I got them their own copies. Books have always been a big part of our home culture. I have a huge bookshelf at home, and when they were younger, and this didn't work very well when they're young, by the way. We had something at home called TED Talk Tuesday, and every Tuesday we would pick a TED Talk, and they would watch it, and I would say, hey, I want you to write a couple sentences, like write a paragraph about what you learned. And of course they looked at me like, what the hell are you talking about, Dad? Like, we're not going to do that. And, they would kind of nod their head, but then half the time it wouldn't get done. But in spite of that, it didn't really matter. It was not at all a failure. It was an immense success. And here's why. Fast forward to now in college, they are lifetime learners. They will pick up books. They will learn on their own. They're watching videos. Nowadays we're so fortunate. You can learn on the go anywhere you want with all these different things online, Coursera and Udemy and all these different things. I have accounts with all those. I can't even, I can't keep up either. But the good news is like, I really, it worked. Like the things that we did worked. Like, even though we didn't know they were working at the time, now that they're old enough to, make their own decisions, and they're not gonna listen to us anyways. Right. They're going to be like, they may listen, but they want it to be their own, like they thought of it and they did it. So they're so much more receptive now to, if I say, hey, you guys should check out this book or that article, they will devour it and they'll be like, oh, thanks, Dad, and then we'll talk about it too. So those things that I wanted them to do when they were much younger, talk about it, reflect, that didn't happen then, now it does happen.
Sure. That's great. I'm going to have to use some of that. And the reason I'm asking, for example, my oldest one, and one of the reasons is we put him in Cub Scouts and the whole selling of popcorn. So we would go to malls or door to door, knocking on doors to sell popcorn. And I can clearly notice after the first couple of him going to total strangers to offer popcorn, it was just like nothing. It was just, and I love that. So I'm always looking to ways to incorporate and sort of build that EQ, that emotional intelligence on the three boys that I have. Yes.
Yeah. And keep doing that. Keep doing that. It'll be great. Yeah. Boy Scout, the Scouts is great. Both of my boys are Eagle Scouts. And that was a big influence on their life too, in terms of just, working to get something to completion. Right.
Yeah.
And, that's not an easy thing to do. Only 4% of all Boy Scouts become Eagle Scouts. So, that, I think that had a big, huge influence on the early part of their life as well.
Mo, so where can people find out more information about you and Airgility?
Yeah, absolutely. Airgility.co. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Airgility is our handle on Twitter. You can reach me, also Pramod Raheja, just my full name, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and email me directly, pramod@airgility.co. And pretty easy to find us.
Thank you so much for coming on. I had a great time.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Otto. It was a great time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.